driving down a highway on a Friday night and you see a massive netting just over the road. So you see the flashing lights, you see the beer is flowing, you see that the credit cards are swiping, and on the surface, it's looking like an infinite money printing machine. But underneath it all, well, it's rotten, because instead of what should have been a massive success story, there's a crime scene where greedy executives are busy orchestrating a $5 billion financial massacre. So how does a company with billions of dollars in revenue suddenly admit that it's worth less than zero? And why did the smartest guys in the room just ignore the one fatal flaw staring them right in the face? Well, buckle up, because this is the story of how Topgolf lost $5 billion because of corporate greed. The story begins in the UK in 2000. There were two brothers, Steve and Dave. Now, they had a problem because they hated the lonely, quiet driving range experience. And if you have played golf at all at a driving range, you probably know what we're talking about. So they came up with something that was kind of crazy. They put microchips inside of golf balls. I know, a totally normal thing to do, right? But they turned what was normally a boring practice session into a competitive video game. And it's important to realize here that they didn't really invent anything new. They just kind of created the bowling of golf. And here's the interesting part, it worked, because it stripped away what normal golfers have to deal with. They didn't have to worry about dress codes. No one was yelling at them for slow play. They didn't even need to own expensive golf clubs. They just needed beer and some big glowing targets to aim for. Now, I remember my first trip to a Topgolf. I was having a blast trying not to fall off into the net, right? But then the server dropped the check after we were done. And I realized that I could have played a full 18 holes of golf at a nice course and had dinner at the 19th hole for less than half the price. Now, real golf, it gave me 4 hours of challenge. It gave me time out in nature, actually outside. And Topgolf gave me 2 hours of loud music and expensive appetizers, and to be honest, I never went back after that. But clearly, I was the exception, because for a long time, the math of Topgolf actually worked. By 2019, Topgolf was an absolute juggernaut. They were pulling in $1.1 billion in revenue every single year. And the golf industry, well, they noticed this as well, because they viewed Topgolf as a quote-unquote savior, since a lot of traditional golf courses were starting to close down at this point. To be honest, Topgolf had really cracked the code on one of the biggest demographic sectors in the world, millennials, because they actually made golf cool again. But then something broke, because in some lifeless executive boardroom with the air condition humming and 30-year-old scotch just sitting there on tap, they had these empty suits over at Callaway Golf, which is a $3 billion equipment giant. They saw Topgolf not as a cool place to hang out, but they saw it as fresh meat. You see, these delusional executives, they convinced themselves that if you liked hitting a ball at a target while eating nachos and wings, you were probably desperate to buy professional sets of golf clubs, right? Well, not really. That's a pretty terrible assumption, right? But Callaway saw a massive credit card to exploit, and at that moment, they triggered a set of events that no one saw coming, and they set the stage for one of the biggest financial disasters in professional sports history. The executives over at Callaway, they decided to go all in, because they didn't just want a piece of the pie, they wanted to gorge themselves on the entire bakery. So they bought Topgolf in an all-stock deal that was valued at roughly $2.6 billion, claiming that there was synergy, which is pretty much corporate speak for, I hope they buy our golf equipment. I mean, listen to how ridiculous, okay, this plan was. You go to Topgolf for a friend's party, you have a few drinks, and suddenly you decide that, hey, I love golf. Therefore, on your way out the door, you stop by the pro shop and buy a $600 Callaway driver. Makes perfect sense, right? Well, if you can't tell from my sarcasm, that was a plumb stupid idea. You see, Callaway, they were completely out of touch because instead of middle-aged guys with expendable income showing up at Topgolf, it was your typical Chad showing up. You see, Chad would show up, he would down 3 margaritas wearing flip-flops holding a chicken wing. But Chad, he's not really there to discuss his launch angles using the newest paradigm driver. No, Chad just wants an Uber to get home safe. You see, the people who are filling up the bays on a Friday night, they aren't there to lower their golf handicap. They're there to have drinks, to have fun, and just to hang out. But this is where it gets worse because these out-of-touch empty suits over at Callaway, they needed a few things to make their grand vision work. And one of those few things was more locations. But building a brand spanking new Topgolf location, it is incredibly expensive. I mean, think about it. Have you ever seen a Topgolf? They are massive and cost around $25 million just to build one of them, which is pretty crazy for a glorified driving range, right? And this is where Callaway actually fell into one of their biggest traps that doomed the whole company, because they weren't going to use their own money to build these massive locations. You see, in 2021, interest rates were near zero, and the government had to flood the economy with cash to help fight the pandemic slowdown, and the money at the time was basically free to borrow. It was free money, right? And Callaway looked at these low interest rates and decided to load up on as much debt as he possibly could. They borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars to fund this massive construction spree of new Topgolf facilities. Now, these greedy executives, they were incentivized to focus on quantity and not quality. So they were receiving bonuses that were tied to growth and not necessarily customer satisfaction. And we saw the effects of this on the stock market, because if they opened like 10 new locations, you saw the stock price increase and they got their fat paychecks. So they were essentially building their own bubble that was getting ready to pop, that was fueled by cheap debt and a pure arrogance that they had as a company. And to keep the bubble as inflated as possible, they decided to screw over the only people that actually mattered. Now, let me explain to you Topgolf's one and done problem. So I want to break down the insane math for just your average Joe going to Topgolf, okay? So let's just say you take your family of 4 there on a Saturday. So first you have to rent the bay. Now, depending on where you are, you could run probably $60 or so per hour. So if you're there for 2 hours, that's $120, and that's before you even order a glass of water, okay? Then comes the food and the drinks, and they really started pricing this like it was some type of Vegas nightclub, because by the time you paid for appetizers and burgers and drinks for everyone, you were easily looking at a bill of around $200 to $300. Let's compare that with actual golf, okay? So you walk into a local course, you pay about 40, maybe $50 to play for 4 entire hours. You get fresh air, you get exercise, you get a genuine sporting challenge and experience. But Topgolf, let's look at the contrast, right? Topgolf was charging Ferrari prices for a Honda Civic experience. And this is where the greed really came to play, and they created their own one and done problem. You see, Topgolf is essentially a novelty. It's fun the first couple of times you go, you take a selfie, you hit a few balls, you have a laugh. But once that novelty actually wears off, I mean, I didn't go back, so would you? I mean, even if it cost you over $200 every time you went, sounds pretty crazy to me. But I went a little deeper, right? So I dug into the actual reviews on Trustpilot just to see what other people are thinking, and the feedback is brutal. One reviewer called it a complete ripoff. Another one, they described the service as terrible, comparing it to a Walmart experience with Ritz-Carlton pricing. So Topgolf essentially priced out families because they really couldn't afford to go there anymore. And that wasn't even the biggest blow, because that came from the corporate world. So for years, Topgolf's secret weapon was that corporate bookings for CEOs and corporate retreats and whatever you want to call it, they became the easy money to help keep the lights on, especially during slow weekdays. But When the economy eventually started to bounce back and it tightened up, those corporate credit cards started being put away, and that easy money that Topgolf was earning evaporated almost overnight. So then Callaway, the owner of Topgolf, they finally did it. They managed to annoy both your average golfer and the non-golfer at the same time, and as a result, sales started to suffer because customers, they just walked away. But what didn't walk away was the huge loans that Callaway took out to build these now useless buildings, and an unexpectedly world event came in and changed completely Topgolf's brand new business model. So this is what happened. To fight inflation, the US government raised interest rates very, very aggressively. And suddenly the billions of dollars in variable rate debt that Callaway had used to build all of these Topgolf venues all of a sudden started exploding in interest. So that free money that they had, a lot of it came due back at that one moment. They had built a house of cards on cheap loans, and the wind started picking up, okay? So in February of 2025, Callaway, they had to do something pretty catastrophic. They simply just admitted defeat, and they announced a staggering $1.45 billion impairment charge. So in plain English, an impairment charge is a company basically saying, hey, we burned $1.5 billion of your money. So Callaway was admitting here that the asset that they had bought from Topgolf that was originally worth $2 billion, yeah, it wasn't worth that anymore. In fact, it was worth a lot less. So as you would expect, a lot of the investors, they started freaking out because the stock price plummeted after this announcement. It went from being around $37 a share, it dropped all the way down to less than $9. So it had caught up with them. That rotting structure that Callaway had built over on top of Topgolf's reputation was starting to crumble from the inside. Sales at a lot of these existing locations were dropping 10 to 13% month over month, meaning that the business, it wasn't growing anymore. In fact, it was doing the opposite. It was shrinking. So desperate to stop the bleeding, Callaway held a humiliating fire sale of Topgolf, to which at this point had become pretty much a toxic asset. So for clarity, let's break down this debacle. So in 2021, fresh off the heels of the merger, Callaway and Topgolf combined were worth around $7 billion. After the stock plummeted a few years later, both companies were worth less than $1.5 billion. That is a loss of over $5 billion and is easily one of the worst destructions of shareholder value in the history of professional sports. Callaway, they tried to financialize fun, and in the process, they just killed the vibe. But if you think that this corporate blunder was bad, wait until you see what happened with this famous golfer. So click right here. It's called The One Mistake That Changed Golf Forever. Please subscribe, and I'll see you compadres later.